Bibliophiles of the internet, my name's Adriana, and today I'm here to bring you my January wrap-up. January was wild because I feel like my reading plan swerved every which way, but I still read more than I thought. Question mark? You'll see what I mean. Let's start talking about these books. For my first book of the decade, I listened to / reread The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster, read by Rainn Wilson. Yes, that dude from The Office. This is a classic middle grade fantasy adventure about Milo, who is extremely bored and doesn't see the point in learning anything, until one day he finds this mysterious tollbooth and car left in his bedroom, and when he drives through, he finds himself in a completely different world. This world is divided into two warring kingdoms, Dictionopolis, the kingdom of words, and Digitopolis, the kingdom of numbers. The two kingdoms have been at odds ever since the two princesses, Rhyme and Reason, were banished, and it's up to Milo to get them back. Just thinking about this book is wild to me because it was published in the 60s. I first read it in the 90s. I've reread it countless times ever since, and I'm still talking about it in 2020. This story is incredibly innovative, and over half a century later, it still feels wondrous and fresh because it's a world built off idioms and language. It's a world where you can literally eat your words, where conclusions is an island you can jump to, where an orchestra can play the dawn, where actual demons thrive in a place called ignorance. It's so incredibly clever and smart. And I think I keep coming back to this story because it's ultimately about learning to find meaning in life, how to discover and rediscover what it feels like to wonder and marvel at the world and all the complicated ways it works. It's about a character who has no drive, no agency, no interest in anything, and how he turns out to be exactly the right person to save this world he comes to love, which is so great. I love this book so much, and I highly, highly recommend it to anyone and everyone. It continues to be a forever 5-star book. After that, I picked up The Rise of KYOSHI by F.C. Yee. This is a canon novelization of the early life of KYOSHI before she became the Avatar, hailing back to when she was living as an orphan in the streets. When her loved ones are cut down right in front of her, KYOSHI becomes hell-bent on revenge and begins seeking her own form of ruthless justice while still trying to master all the elements. Content warnings for death, graphic injury, mild gore, and violence. I've been rewatching Avatar because of this book, so I mean it when I say the story invokes the very same energy as the original series. And that's really saying something because obviously the act of bending elements is better shown in a visual medium, so it would seem like the odds are stacked against FCE when all he has to use are his words. But I was able to perfectly picture every single detail, and I thought the action sequences, of which there are many, were pitch perfect. What I love about this origin story is that it subverts everything we know about the Avatar and shows a side of KYOSHI you might not expect. Obviously, the Avatar, master of all four elements, is expected to be balanced, someone who is a peacekeeper, someone who is exemplary and believes very fiercely in justice. But KYOSHI uses her power selfishly, she burdens herself with anger, and she often ignores the greater good in favor of vengeance. This story deals heavily with the tremendous loss that she's faced, so it makes sense that she's acting from a place of trauma and pain, but she eventually learns how to act from a place of power and to trust in her path no matter how dark it may get. KYOSHI is unorthodox. She takes on thieves and criminals as her mentor, she acts rashly out of self-interest, and she even fixates on murdering someone from her past. But I think those things are only going to make her grow in ways we would not expect. Plus, it should be noted that this book is queer as heck, and I enjoyed that very much. I really love how this story brought me right back into this world I love so much, and I gave it a solid 4 stars. After that, I went with a backlist title and finally listened to Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson, read by the author himself. Bryan Stevenson is a lawyer and social justice activist. Just Mercy is his memoir about how he founded the Equal Justice Initiative, or EJI, which aims to free unjustly convicted people from death row and reduce unlawful life sentences. This memoir goes through many of his early cases, but the major case underlining the entire book is that of Walter McMillan, a black man convicted for the murder of a white woman he had never even met. Content warnings for usage of the N-word and other slurs, mentions of rape, assault, murder, drug abuse, ableism, police brutality, and overt racism within the court. What's incredible about this book is that it was released in 2014, written about an underlying case that took place primarily in the 80s and 90s, and yet it speaks directly to a systemic crisis that the United States continues to face. Our justice system, our incarceration system, is inherently broken, and it's inherently broken because it's inherently racist. One of the main ideas that Stevenson Stevenson outlines in this memoir is that systemic racism exists and continues to thrive based on who we assign guilt, who we intrinsically believe is capable of guilt. And it also has roots in our history itself. As much as we would like to believe, racism did not end when segregation was dissolved. The end of slavery did not hail the end of racism. Racism has merely evolved and changed faces. As Stevenson points out, we still keep Black citizens in shackles. 1 in every 3 Black babies born is expected to be incarcerated in their lifetime. Mothers with minor offenses are banned from governmental assistance. People with any criminal charges are often denied work or even the ability to vote. Prisons have become a privatized business where bodies in cells, specifically Black and brown bodies, are necessary to make ends meet, where laws are often implemented to entrap people in minor offenses. It's this system that made it possible for Walter Macmillan to be imprisoned and sentenced to death for the murder of someone he had never met in a town he'd never been to, even though at the time of her death he was in his own home surrounded by about 20 witnesses who attested to his innocence. Even in Stevenson's own experiences overseeing the case, he was often disrespected as a lawyer, which goes back to who we consider to be credible, who we consider to be worthy of respect and trust. And those beliefs are a direct holdover from this country's legacy of slavery and racism, which ultimately has not healed or changed by any significant metric. This is a powerful must-read that I think is equal parts informative and meaningful. Ultimately, I gave it 4.5 stars. Then I read my arc of Untamed Shore by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This comes out on February 11th. It's an own voices blend of thriller and noir set in Baja California about Viridiana, who is bored with watching dead sharks wash up on shore and feeling like her lot in life is to get married and have kids. When 3 wealthy American tourists rent out a house for the summer, Viridiana finds herself in their employ as a note taker, but she's also drawn into their glamorous lifestyles. It's not long before one of the American tourists is mysteriously killed, and Viridiana finds herself having to defend the character and identity of these strangers who she may not know as well as she thinks. I was thoroughly entranced with this story from beginning to end, mostly because I saw something very familiar about Viridiana's plight. Here you have a strong, educated, ambitious Mexican woman who finds herself absorbed into this rich white family as a note-taker and clerical assistant, but she finds herself ultimately cast as the servant. They begin asking her to run errands or clean the house or do the cooking or carry things to and from the beach, basically saying that they can make her do whatever they want because they write her paycheck. And then when these people find themselves at the center of a murder investigation, they expect her to defend them and sing their praises. And she does. She feels this obligation to her colonizers, to her betrayers, to the very people who take advantage of her and minimize her existence. Even though it's definitely different tonally and by no means a one-to-one comparison, this book kind of gave me low-key Knives Out energy because it centers a young Latinx woman left to reckon with an effed up white family's mess. But Viridiana realizes that the only way to move forward is to follow the story her life is becoming, even if it's not the story she envisioned for herself. Even though she's surrounded by destructive people, she refuses to allow herself to be destroyed, and I really appreciate that. To me, this story is about the toxic nature of assimilation. It's about marginalized people having to appeal to the same people and institutions that devalue them in the first place, and I found it to be an incredible and haunting reading experience. I gave it 4.5 stars. Then I listened to The Wizards of Once by Cressida Cowell, read by David Tennant. This is a middle-grade fantasy adventure about a magical forest where there are warriors and wizards. Warriors don't believe that magic should exist, while wizards are trying to protect magic. There's a young wizard boy named Czar who hasn't yet come into his magic, and a warrior princess named Wish who has run away from home to protect a strange magical object that's fallen into her possession, and Czar will do anything to get it. First of all, once again, David Tennant gives a stunning performance in this audiobook, but what I really enjoy is that neither of these characters are quite what you would expect. When you hear there's a young wizard boy, you might picture someone earnest and curious, but Czar actually has kind of a frat boy energy. He's extremely rash, arrogant, and self-centered, and he has a lot of really bad ideas and horrible luck. Wish, on the other hand, instead of being this fierce, violent, war-hungry strategist, is quite thoughtful, gentle, and curious for a warrior princess. The ways they contrast each other another make their shared adventure dynamic, and their differences are actually what help them get out of horrible situations. My one thing is that while this is a funny, engaging, creative adventure story and a great start to a series, I wanted to see even more character growth and connection by the end, and I didn't quite get that, but still I gave this a solid 4 stars. After that, I listened to Once Ghosted, Twice Shy by the wonderful ALYSSA Cole, read by Karen Chilton. This queer romance novella is part of the Reluctant Royal series. It follows Prince Thabiso's assistant, Lakotsi, who swiped right on this amazing girl, and they had a whirlwind romance before it ultimately ended in heartbreak. Now that Lakotsi is back in New York, she runs into Fabiola on the subway. They agree to get some tea together, which may just open the door to a second chance. This novella hits all the very best notes. Second chance romance, queer love story, both queer characters being people of color, excessive cuteness, need I say more? What I really enjoy about this is that there's such an honesty, urgency, and earnestness to this romance. When it comes to romance, you come to expect awesome one-liners, but there were some declarations in here that you could tell were so genuine and so lacking pretense that honestly, if a professional, educated, driven, independent woman said to me, would take me out the game 100%. And I also appreciate how this story focuses on these two women who have a lot going on in their lives and who are genuinely afraid to put that on someone else, but who ultimately realize that they have to trust they're both strong enough to bear the weight. This novella wonderfully balances social justice, whimsy, and New York romance all in about 100 pages, and I really enjoyed it. It was definitely a little cheesy at times, but I still gave it 4 stars. Then after loving This Is How You Lose the Time War, I had to read more from Amal El Motar, so I picked up The Honey Month, which is a very strange little book. This is a short collection of work that seems to defy genre and all categorization. It's part memoir, part poetry collection, part short story collection, part original fairy tales. It all began when one of Amal El Motar's friends gave her this huge collection of honey samples, and she decided to taste one type of honey every day, document the taste, and then create a piece inspired by that flavor and taste. This is such a heady, lush, provocative collection. Every piece is wildly different, but there's an undercurrent of longing and sheer wonder at the world and all its hidden places. It's very experimental and abstract, but I think this collection is really a celebration of language and sensation. El Motar evokes taste that can be seen and felt. Her images feel tangible and close, and she shows how just the right word can express a feeling in its entirety. I read this slowly, piece by piece, over the course of several days, and I really lost myself in it every single time. I can't claim to have understood every piece, but I definitely felt every piece, and for that I gave this 4.5 stars. Then I read a book that's been on my shelf pretty much ever since I started my channel, and that is Liesl and Poe by Lauren Oliver. This is a middle grade fantasy adventure about Liesl, whose stepmother has forced her to live in the attic ever since her father's death. But now her father's ashes have finally been returned to their home, and Liesl plans to take them to his final resting place. On that same night, a strange ghost forms at her bedside who promises to help her escape, and she also runs into a young alchemy apprentice carrying a box of the world's most powerful magic. Content warnings for parental death, ableist remarks, verbal abuse, and referring to a notably genderless person as it. Let's talk about that for a second, because this book was published in 2011, and social consciousness, if it can be called that in 2011, is very different from 2020. It does bother me that Poe, a ghost who says in no uncertain terms that they are neither boy nor girl because the other side doesn't have such distinctions, is referred to as it when there were so many better alternatives. If this book were published today, it would be rightfully criticized for its word choices on several occasions, and it should be. We have higher standards, and in those respects, sometimes the writing misses the mark. But putting that aside, I found this to be a whimsical adventure with a strong focus on friendship, loyalty, and navigating grief, which is something I still think we don't see nearly enough of in books for younger audiences. For the entire story, Liesl has a designated endpoint. She's trying to get to a specific place, and then she'll finally give herself permission to let go. And I think a lot of people process grief that way, which is what makes it a powerful journey to witness. My only hang-ups, besides the choices in language, were that some of the villains felt a bit comical at times, and that the other main character, Poe, doesn't have as much of an emotional arc as Liesl does. We never get to see who Poe is, where they come from, what they're going through, and it kind of seems like they're only there to hold Liesl's hand through this process, and that's it. But overall, I found this to be a story that balances whimsy and emotion while still managing to feel clever and exciting, and that's why ultimately I rounded it up to 3.5 stars. And lastly, I did read Infinity Sun by Adam Severa, but I made an entire reading vlog where you can witness firsthand all the ups and downs of my reading experience, so definitely check that out. So those are all the books I read in the month of January, a little bit of everything like I mentioned. If you have anything to add about any of these books, or if you would like to tell me what you're currently reading, meet me in the comments down below and we can discuss. But that's everything I had for this wrap up today. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you on the flip side of the page.